Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh, and that's Callum, and that is Scott. And we're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
Indeed, said Clowen. If it were not for the Beornings, the passage from Dale to Rivendell would long ago have become impossible. They are valiant men and keep open the High Pass and the Ford of Carrick. But their tolls are high, he added with a shake of his head. And like Beorn of old, they are not over fond of dwarfs. Still, they are trusty, and that is much in these days.
Hello Callum, hello Scott.
Hello.
Hello Scott, hello Josh.
Hello Josh, hello Callum.
That's how we do these things now.
Apparently so. Welcome back to the podcast. We left our last session on a cliffhanger, I believe. That's right, isn't it, Callum?
We did. We love cliffs in this game. Listen to the terrain episode if you want to hear more about cliffs. So we left it on a cliffhanger, which we are not going to answer.
We are not going to answer, that's right,
Yeah.
because we need to talk about Beornings as a culture. So what do we know and what have we learned playing? I think that's the things we want to talk about.
Yeah. Maybe I'm going to ask Scott first, because you've both played Beornings, and I've never played a Beorning. So how do you feel about the term Beorning? Like, what does that, what sort of sense, like values, or, you know, what does Beorning mean to you, I guess? I'd like start with that, and then maybe I can talk us through a little bit of what Tolkien wrote, or my understanding of what he wrote, and what the book adds, and then what we've added.
Okay. Karhu?
I think as Karhu, an immense sense of pride in being a Beorning.
Okay.
Like, they do not like being slighted by others. It's not something to mock them for. Stubborn, I would say. I think for most of the Beornings that we've encountered, not so much Theodric.
No, and actually I thought about Theodric as where did he come from as a Beorning? And I agree exactly with you, the idea of being quite stubborn, not taking to maybe the opinions of outsiders as well. But my perception of Theodric was that he was a Beorning who had then travelled around a lot, and who had maybe, because of that, some of his more extreme personalities had maybe been smoothed out a little bit because he'd been exposed to other people. But I was the same as you, thinking that he was started as quite a gruff, stubborn, knows his mind kind of person. And I thought it probably took him a while to open up and become more worldly. That probably didn't come very naturally to him. My perception, I think, and like Beorn is my favourite character from The Hobbit, but that section where they visit him, I just think is so much fun. And as a character, I think even just one chapter, his whole personality is kind of captured by the way that Gandalf and the dwarves and Bilbo have to go in one by one. I think Tolkien does a good job there, that his character he's very direct, but not rude. He just doesn't have time for kind of like nonsense or sideways talk. He just wants you to be direct with him. He doesn't, not into unnecessary pleasantries. It felt to me his whole personality is defined by the fact he lives in the wild on his own. So he doesn't really have pleasantries because he doesn't really talk to other people, and he's busy and has a hard life, so he doesn't want long-winded stories, and he's quite tough as a person, I think, because he lives in quite a dangerous place. So I thought for Theodric that it's very much grounded in like where he's from, physically where he's from, what it's like is the personality of the Beornings. And I think all the other things like being strong and being good with animals all kind of come from that.
Yeah,
It's great. Yeah, there's so much inspiration that can be drawn from that description, and that is by far and away that chapter of The Hobbit is, by far and away the most description we get of Beorn, and I guess by inference then what becomes the Beornings. And I guess just going back to like what's written. So, there's that section in The Hobbit, and then there was the section from Lord of the Rings that I read out, which is when they're at the many meetings. So they're at Rivendell, and they're speaking to Glóin or Gloin. I'm never really sure. I think you're meant to pronounce it Glóin, but I always pronounce it Gloin. Write in if you're upset about that.
Where would people write into?
The fellowship phase at gmail.com.
That's right.
And Glóin mentions, these Beornings that are guarding the pass, and they charge high tolls. So there's not much information, but they're giving you a little snippet in there. And I'm not sure where it is. It's maybe in the appendices somewhere that there is mention that at the time of Lord of the Rings, maybe it's in History's Middle Earth, I can't remember which, that whilst there's a lot of conflict happening in the south, Sauron is also making moves in the north. So we know that, Dale is attacked and Erebor is attacked, and the kings of both those kingdoms. So Dane is killed, as is Bard's son, Bane, I think, is it? Or I can't remember exactly who it is. Anyway, they are attacked. Lothlorien is attacked, and then the elves come out and they go and take down Dol Guldur, basically. And I think there's some mention that Beorn's son, Grimbeorn, and the Beornings are involved in that. And it's a sort of, again, a throwaway line. So there's little bits that we know of what happens after The Hobbit. We know that Beorn becomes a leader and has this group of people. So a real big change from how he's presented in Hobbit. Like, completely different from what you described there. We know that they survive till the time of Lord of the Rings, and that there's someone with the name Grimbeorn who is a son or an inheritor of that. And we know that they guard the area, so they're good, and that they charge money, and they are not friendly with dwarves. And that's pretty much it. That's the full extent of what is in the official canon, I think. There might be small bits I've missed, but I think that's the main thing. So it's not much, is it?
It's really not a lot to go on at all, really. And we know that the way that Tolkien effectively created The Hobbit was it effectively grew out of being a children's story and didn't necessarily need to have a huge amount of lore. So Beorn was obviously created as an individual character who was fascinating, and then all this lore has kind of grown because, well, if he lives there, then that must mean other things are happening in that area. And as the books grew, it was like, well, we now need to know what's going on in that area. So who would be there with him? It makes sense he'd be a leader because his personality was very big and strong, but he also lived in isolation, so presumably he's not, the leader of a city or something like that. So what would the dynamic of the people be like? And it doesn't really touch on that in the official canon at all, really, beyond just referring to him as a leader and there being some other people.
What I love about this, and I think this is a genius game design decision to set it in this time period and have it focus on the Anduin Vale and Wilderland, as they call it, is that there's so much room to be creative and make your own stories. And I think the Beornings have been a group that we have, as a group, created and fleshed out so much. And I guess, to me, like, where I started was asking questions. Like, the books have a lot of extra stuff, and I'll come on to that. But the things that, like, from that snippet of information that I ask myself is, what was it that made Beorn go from being this isolated, very independent, self-sufficient person to leading a group of people? Who were these people before? So presumably other people that lived from that area. They maybe lived there already and just didn't have affiliation with Beorn, so they're very independent. So why is it that they then accepted him? He's an exceptional person. We know that. Gandalf pays him a great deal of respect. So that's one question, is where these people came from. Another question is, how does he manage as a leader? So I hope that that's come across in role-playing. Like, this is someone, he's not, a born and bred leader. This is someone who's had an experience. So this is going to be something that they struggle with and potentially want to hide from people, that this is so difficult. And then maybe that's come out through the campaign, is at the beginning it's like, new players, it's Beorn, like, oh my god, it's Beorn. And now later in the campaign, I think, certainly, I don't know how Carhu, his perception of Beorn has changed over time as he's got to know him better.
Massively. Like that first encounter we had after, was it the first session, the first two sessions, and we crossed back across the woods and met Beorn. I had it in my head that Karu had seen Beorn around, but he'd never spoken to him before. Because Karu didn't think he was important enough, so he was the leader of his people, and oh my god, this is a huge thing. Now, he's a man. He is fallible.
Yeah, and he has fouled.
Yeah.
If that's it. Was that a word?
It is now.
And he is still worthy of respect, but he is a man.
Yeah, he's definitely, in our game, certainly, Beorn has made mistakes, and I think that, for me, was always something that I thought about, because I was like, well, you can't just suddenly become a great leader, an inspirational person, and it's such a difference. Like, I feel like that's something that he's going to struggle with.
Yeah. You're right, he's not a born leader, he's not been raised or groomed for being in charge, so he's never had any training for being a leader as
He's
much
never
as
been on
anyone
a leadership and management course.
Well, precisely, which means he's only learnt by doing, and that presumably means he's made mistakes along the way to get good at what he's doing. So I think we've certainly found through the role play that Beorn became a very fleshed out character. I also think that the area became quite fleshed out through our role play. Like we've talked before about creating Stonyford, which was partly you as the lore master there's this place with these people. And then partly us as players engaging with that content actually ends up growing it into a community and those were bigger characters. So how much do you think of what we think of as the Beornings came from us as players?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, so I guess in the books, just to lay out what they've added, like what Cubicle 7 wrote, and there is quite a lot of locations in the game in Anduin Vale, and actually a lot of them I didn't use. So there's a lot of like extra houses or other people named characters. So you came across a couple of people, so like Gilvira and Nalda, all the people at Stonyford. There's quite a lot in there, and I think it might be a bit weird. I thought it was a bit weird reading the book, because it's like the Anduin Vale is this huge area, but it felt to me like there was a lot of people and a lot of stuff going on. I was like, I just kind of wanted to feel a bit more bare and empty. Oops. So yeah, I think it's definitely a mix. Just looking at the, I guess it's like, what's the society like? Most people are probably living off in independent houses. You've never really had a time where it's like all the Beornings have come together. So I guess our concept as a group of the Beornings is based on not that many people. I'm trying to think, it's like maybe like 10 max Beorning NPCs that you've interacted with.
Yeah, I've never kind of given thought to how many there would be, but I always thought they were a small group of people and lived very quite isolated from one another, which I think lends to the character of being perhaps a bit suspicious but also being very strong and independent, is because they live in a dangerous place far from other people. I think that makes you think of a certain type of person, as opposed to the woodmen who live nearby but live in communities and have built walls, and a very different type of person living in the same area.
Yeah,
and I think
And what differentiates those people? Presumably the Beornings they don't just pop out into existence. They were people before Beorn became a leader. So who were they? Were they woodmen? The people that have moved over from settling? There's a throwaway line in one of the books, which is like, after the fall of Dale and the dragon, a lot of people came into Anduin Vale. I don't know if that's something that Tolkien wrote about, probably not, but it kind of makes sense. Like we know the dwarves from Erebor went all the way to Dunland at one point. So, maybe there's some people that come over from Dale. So, yeah, when you're talking about what we've created as a group and what's already there, I find it very hard to unpick. But I think Scott, certainly, maybe this is a moment to speak about like Carhu's backstory that you came up with, and like, because that was just a gift, an absolute gift. Thank you for that.
That's all right. So I, much like Josh was saying, like in my head, Beornings lived maybe within family units, dotted around the land that Beorn ruled, and I was like, well, my family live in a little village on the north of Beorn's land. He had mum and a dad, siblings, and the village was called Grim Village. And his dad was Grimfast. So, to me, that meant absolutely nothing. I just come up with these names and gave them to our wonderful lore master. not realizing that had implications for Tolkien lore.
And did you like the whole Grimm thing? Genuinely,
I saw. I don't even know if it's a name in here.
It's mentioned.
Grimfast.
Yeah.
So I saw there was a lot of names called Grimm, and I was like, well, Grimm will be the village. Grimfast is his dad. Didn't think anything else of it. I was just like, I'm going to give Karhu a family and a reason for his backstory.
Yes.
And just basically said to Callum, this is what I've come up with. Does that sound okay? Not realising that, a year and a bit in real life time that would have major implications.
Yeah, that you sent me that backstory, and then nothing happened. I didn't do anything with it for ages, and then we entered into an arc where it turned out that one of the people you've been fighting was your sister.
Yep.
And that was what changed there for Karhu. I guess we're kind of straying into the maybe we'll come back to that in the next episode. So,
but in terms of creating the Beornings as a people, I think having a player who's a Beorning with a backstory does let you then.
Yeah, so we won't go into the detail of that, but I think you having a family helped me a lot to flesh things out, and having some extra locations and people, and actually that sort of inspired my story of what happened to Beorn. And I think to me, it was like, what was the change in Beorn? What caused him to change? He went into this battle of 5 armies, and I think my imagination anyway is that he was a solitary person, and then he, for some reason, went to that battle and got involved collectively in a really major event and had a big part to play. Like, he killed Bolg in the book. It's like he had a very important part to play in that battle. But that was him sort of like committing to the world. It's almost like the end, isn't it? That same sort of like, I'm isolating, or like the end of the isolationist policy from America, World War II. I'm making that analogy. Let's just do it.
I like that. I wasn't expecting it. I like it a lot.
So then he comes back and he's engaged. He's gone to this battle, and then he comes back and he's like, well, actually, maybe I do need to. Maybe it's not enough to be isolationist. Maybe I have something to contribute. And also, what we've came up with was that actually he didn't go to that battle on his own, which is slightly changed in the lore, I think, because it isn't really ever mentioned. But like, if there are these people that follow him, maybe some other Beornings went to the battle. Maybe not all of them came back, or maybe people went with Beorn, came back, and their perceptions and ideas and values changed based on what happened.
I think two things. First of all, I think Beorn, even in The Hobbit, it's implied, went very reluctantly, because he arrives at the battle either just in time or slightly late, which as a reader I always took to mean that he kind of reluctantly went, and only when battle really started did he actually join in. He didn't really want to be there, which I think means he's kind of a reluctant leader. And I think often those are the most interesting characters, because he doesn't necessarily want to be in charge, and then there's that kind of inner conflict of feeling perhaps a sense of duty or loyalty to his people, or I like that a lot. Yeah. I also think about, and I was just thinking about this prompted by what you said there, Callum, that in our story, some people went with him to the battle. And actually, a good example of the culture is they don't really have any kind of books or libraries or anything. I would think of them as being a culture that had a lot of an oral tradition and told stories. And because of that, it's quite plausible that the stories are slightly different and they evolve. So some people like Beorn went on his own. Other people say, well, people went with Beorn. They might say, is that maybe both? Maybe does it matter?
Yeah,
the story is still the idea that the Beornings contributed to the battle. I suppose it leaves a lot of space, like you said, for creating a culture between us as players.
Yeah, I don't think we can really talk about the Beornings without talking about the person they're named after, Beorn. And the Rovanian Region Guide in Adventures Middle-earth has this, is it 4 pages that are devoted to Beorn. And there's a lot in there, and it's got some stuff about the locations, which I wanted to come back to. But one thing interesting is that Beorn is really reluctant to let people in, rarely invites foreigners in. But then we had 2 Beornings in the party, so it immediately meant that actually you're much more likely to come into him. And we talked before about how the book lays out like expectations and motivations for people. And not to give too much away, but essentially that, you know, one of the things he doesn't like, which I think is really fun, is if they lie to him or obsequious. I don't have to say that word. How do you say that word?
Just go with it.
Obsequious?
Obsequious.
Obsequious. Thank you. I read that before and I never actually had to say it out loud, I think. Obsequious. That's not right. Or drone on without purpose, which I hope that came across when I roleplayed him.
Yes, it did.
You really didn't want people to talk too much.
He often cut off, like when people were doing long-winded speeches, he would often just jump in with a question. Clearly wanted people to just be like, well, what are you talking about?
It was a lot of fun.
It's very different from usual, yeah. Which is a hard thing to interrupt people but not do it in a mean way is difficult. So that's part of it, is that reluctant leader. It actually gives you a profile for Beorn, which we were reading through before. We were talking about creating profiles. So there's a profile for Beorn, and oh dang, he's strong. He's strong. I got to use it in combat once, and really fun. Actually, Karhu might be more powerful than Nano. Put the two of them to fight against each other. But I guess the interesting thing around Beorn is he can shapeshift into a bear.
Yes.
And that's not normal. And there's a whole page in this book devoted to some just ideas that the writers have and some thoughts about what that is, and the idea of things called Gias, which I think is from Celtic Norse mythology. You know, like this idea of people taking on an obligation. So Beorn doesn't eat meat and he looks after animals and so on, but it's given him certain powers.
Okay.
Like he can speak to his animals, he can turn into a bear. So what is the nature of that is a big question of Beorn, and we explore that with Karhu. I think every time there's a question that's thrown up, it gives me ideas for how to create an interesting story. And then I guess the other question that's come in my head is this throwaway comment by Gloin in the book, which is they have high tolls.
Yes.
And I've never really resolved this in my head, and I'm interested in your thoughts. What, we know that Middle Earth, and it's not really like a society. There's not a lot of money mentioned in the game, and I kind of messed up the economy very early on in the game, and then we sort of stopped bothering with it. I feel like I gave you way too much gold early on. So why is a society taking tolls? What is that to buy goods, or
I have a thought.
I have a thought as well.
Okay, because I never really puzzled this out myself. I'm really interested in what your thoughts are.
Do you want to go first? Shall I go first?
Go first.
My thought is it's nothing to do with the money. Because I actually can't envisage them as people who would use money for trading, that they're a small community and would likely either just share property or would trade very directly. Like, the idea of currency is quite alien. So the money is because they don't like outsiders on their land, and they feel unsafe and they want to protect their land, and so there's that sense of you have to pay a toll, in this case money, to cross our land.
Exact same reason. It was basically we want to discourage people as much as possible, so we're going to create a stupid price that you can pay and we'll take your money, but we want to protect our land, our animals, our people. Get the fuck away from us, basically.
That's really... I don't know if I had ever really thought about it that way, and that makes so much sense.
I could totally envisage a moment, and maybe another campaign could do this, where maybe you find all the gold or whatever it is at Beorn's Hall, but rather than being in a chest or a safe it's just tossed in the corner, because it's not about the money, it's about the money represents some kind of sacrifice or cost across the land, which...
And that's such an alien concept in today's society, which is, capitalism and so on. And so I guess it's like the temptation as a player character, and I don't think anybody's fallen into this, might be like, well, we could use all the money to hire some dwarves to build a bridge, or, but yeah, that's like their motivation is, actually that's the motivation for Beorn in the book, is that, leave me and my people alone. Mm-hmm. That's his motivation.
Wow.
So that ties so nicely in with this idea of, we'll just make the toll, we'll just set a ridiculously high toll,
so that no one will
and then no one will come, and then that the complete opposite view of the dwarves, who have to go because they've got family in the Blue Mountains, they have to trade. Like, that's they are very much more materialistic and transactional society. So then, of course, they would feel that's unfair because it's not a reasonable price to pay for it.
Actually, it makes sense that the money as an idea would have come from their interactions with dwarves, who have, as you say, a reason to cross that stretch of land. And you could totally envisage dwarves coming along and Beorn or whoever saying, you're not crossing these lands. And dwarves, being trading folk, would likely be like, well, what can we give you? We'll give you money to cross your land. And I can imagine that was the first point where the Beornings thought, money...
What is this?
What is this? I don't care. They're going to offer it. Let's just ask for a stupid amount.
Yeah. They just come up with an idea for a quest, right? And it's if you were all dwarves, get an idea of like how to like maybe Dane is like wants better relations, and maybe it's like trying to negotiate some sort of contract, which is doomed with Beorn for money, and actually he doesn't want money, but actually when you go there, he's like, well. No amount of money, or like we're not going to have this, but you can go kill this monster, or you can go and do this thing for me, and then I'll allow people to pass. Or because you kind of feel like maybe the Beornings would respect more like trade or like precious goods or like things that have been made like weapons or that sort of thing. But there's definitely a lot of interesting questions that are thrown up by the lack of detail. But what little detail we do have, I certainly found sort of triggered my imagination.
Yeah, and there were a few points while we were playing where what we were doing actually threw up questions like, what would the Beornings do? So we would be maybe celebrating a feast. I think at Stonyford we decided we'd have a feast, and we thought we'd role play, what prep would we do? We then came up with those questions of, well, Beorn is a vegetarian, and that's kind of a key part of the lore, as you touched on. Does that mean all Beornings are like that? We kind of lent on that's not the case, and actually it would maybe be impractical for people in this area to never eat meat. But then that does set Beorn aside as he's made almost like a different lifestyle choice. Then we talked about things like hunting and cooking, and we kind of came up with, I think, the idea that they would cook probably as a large group. They would all contribute in one way or another, which is perhaps different to other cultures. So we kind of filled in the gaps, I think, as we went along, came up with questions of like, well, hang on, what would Beornings do here?
Yeah. It's certainly not vegan, but it was quite fun coming up with ideas for what was on that table. I actually quite like going to a feast of describing all the food. Things like roasted nuts, cream-based products, cheeses, breads,
a lot of honey.
A lot of honey cakes. And we had, because Theodric had his honey cakes, we talked a lot about where that would come from. And in The Hobbit, it talks about the huge bees, which are as big as birds, that Beorn has.
Oh, yeah.
So when we were establishing Stonyford, we wanted to put in hives, which have actually become a plot point since then. Yeah. And that, I think, added again to the kind of the separate culture that the Beornings have. So it's nice that there's not a huge amount written, because I think it does give space for players and lore masters to kind of fill in.
Yeah.
I'd love to know if other... Because we've been playing so long with Beornings that we have a very defined sense of what Beornings are like for us. I'd love to know other groups who've played in the Anduin Vale. Like, are your Beornings similar to how we've described, or is your Anduin Vale completely different? Is Beorn a different character? I'd be fascinated to know. And what can people do? They can email us at...
thefellowshipphase@gmail.com.
Nice.
Or tweet us at
fellowshipphase.
At fellowshipphase. Well, what have we learned? So we've told you a little bit about what the lore is behind the Beornings, what little there is, what the Adventures of Middle-earth books add, and then what we've come up with. And I think we would all agree that the Beornings is a really interesting part, and like has been a key part of our story, particularly for Carhu, which you'll need to join us on the next episode for the double cliffhanger. We're going to find out about Doomed to Die. No emails except on party business. And comments, suggestions and questions to thefellowshipphase @gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return.
On the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.